In a massive announcement this weekend, Elon Musk's artificial intelligence company X.AI just released a new conversational AI that they call Grok. Grok is intended to answer almost anything. The two biggest differentiators than other AI that's out there is first, it's real time. It's built off of Twitter's data stream. And second, it's designed to answer questions with wit and humor with less restrictions. While this was exciting, the other big news is Elon saying how Grok will be used by Tesla. So today, let's explore all the ways Dojo and Grok can benefit Tesla. We've got Hans Nelson joining us. Hans is a mechanical engineer and he's got his own YouTube channel called Hans C. Nelson. Welcome, Hans.
Thanks for having me.
So big news, of course. Grok, I'm sure you signed up like I did for the beta right away, as many
Absolutely.
of us did. This is their announcement by Elon just literally 24 hours ago that they've released Grok and they're letting testers play with it. Their definition of Grok says here that it's according to the description, it's an AI modeled after the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So it's intended to answer almost anything and far harder, even suggest what questions to ask. That's interesting. This model is designed to answer questions with wit, which should be taken into account by those who use it. And then Elon also kind of tweeted out, posted out on X, examples of what Grok says versus the typical GPT, where Grok has current information, but others doesn't. So this is a good example of Grok being able to take advantage of the real-time data stream from Twitter. So the question was, when was Elon's last interview with Joe Rogan? And then the answer by Grok was, last interview with Joe Rogan was on October 31st. In that interview, they discussed topics such as Tesla's Cybertruck, Musk's ownership of X, and the COVID pandemic, and making Mars habitable. And then they asked, what was Rogan wearing? And then Grok was able to answer, right? It's he donned a blonde wig and a Puerto Rico baseball jersey. So this is different than if you ask other GPTs, and this is how this answered, what did Joe Rogan wear in the latest interview? And it just goes off talking about the generic, I'm not going to read this, generic answers. What do you think, Hans, about this new positioning? I think it was pretty brilliant that it's A, real time, and then B, that it's going to answer things with wit and humor. It's a differentiator than what's out there. Do you think that it's going to be enough?
Yeah, it's very interesting. One of the huge issues that ChatGPT faces as far as customer adoption is that it doesn't know the current things that you might be asking questions about very well. And it's an interesting challenge that apparently they have either figured out. I don't know if the data is not part of the training data of the LLM. Like somehow they have separated information from the actual operations of the language model itself. So the language model has access to information and they're consistently updating the corpus of information that it has access to. But it like the use case of asking not only when was it, what did they talk about, and what was Joe Rogan wearing? Like for them to know what Joe Rogan was wearing is a very interesting piece of information to have access to, given the fact that that was video, not text. And so, where was that information pulled from? Those are kind of novel capabilities that unless you showed pictures, and perhaps that was part of the prompting, but unless you showed pictures to ChatGPT using their new multimodal ability, that it wouldn't even be able to do that, even if it had access to current data. So yeah, it's very interesting, novel. They are making progress, it looks like, on some of the core fundamental problems that face LLMs. And I'm really excited to see how this actually rolls out. One of the things that is also interesting about Grok versus something like ChatGPT based on GPT-4 is that it's a much smaller model. So they have like the amount of training resources that they had to devote to it and the size of the model overall are both much smaller than GPT-4. And while it's not quite as performant as GPT-4 on the different evaluation methods, it is much more performant than anything in its class, and it's getting close to GPT-4 performance, with significantly less resources, both in terms of training compute and inference compute.
Yeah. I've been trying to think this through, whether or not this was a smart strategy. I think it is. of how Elon launched this, right? So number one, it's being launched as its own web accessible, service like the Chat GPTs, but it's leveraging also Twitter, previously known as Twitter X, and they're charging X users who pay Premium Plus service to be able to get access to Grok. So that's a revenue stream built on an existing user base. I think that's brilliant. I think that that's going to help them, at least create their own base. If not, I don't know the size of whether or not this is going to be enough to surpass, what ChatGPT is able to accomplish. But two, it's got real-time information based on the X feed, which is really a really real-time ability to know the conscious. Some people are saying that it's close to conscious because if it's got real-time feed, you can see all sides, different opinions from everybody, society, right? Really good, the finger on the pulse. The part I don't know is that because most of X is built on short form text, does that not give it that full explanation that you can get when you do a web search and you got these papers, you got books, you got research that's been done on certain topics? It really can have so much information versus this is just tiny little bits of bullet points all over the place. That one I need to understand better.
Yeah. So as far as I would, this is speculation because we don't have the details, but I would expect that they're using the same open source data and, data about the entire text on the web that other models are using. And then they're adding, so it's not that it's only using Twitter, it's using the same type of training data that all the other language models are using to be created. And then they're adding this access to Twitter that, other LLMs probably could have if they were willing to pay Twitter a fair price for accessing and using that data. But even those people are going to be secondary customers to XAI, which has a much more direct relationship with X. And so, it should have all of that capability. And that's what those evaluations show, is that it's very excellent in the way that it is able to, think. That's one of the other things that I was very impressed with by that example, is that it didn't just go down some random thought, line of thinking and spewing out of answers, like you said, all just that generic information that it spit out on ChatGPT. It actually understood the intent of the question and answered it very succinctly and in very accurate ways.
Yeah. So the other big news that Elon announced as well is and you need to interpret this for me, but he said something like all the Tesla cars, AI's Grok can use a local compute power because the Tesla cars have a computer, an NVIDIA chip system in them. And so while the car is not being used, it's sitting idle, it may be able to grab that, compute power to help Grok. And then let's talk very shortly about all the benefits that Tesla can get from XAI's Grok as well. So let's start with this. What's your interpretation of that announcement?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand is the difference between training compute and inference compute. And so when an LLM is being created, it's basically, think of it as a brain inside of a vat, and that vat is connected to an artificial womb. So that artificial womb, that is the training data center compute that it's feeding that LLM with all of the information that it needs to have in setting up all of the weights and trying to build that brain as best it can. And then once that brain is created, well, then you can put that on a different piece of compute that can run it. And so you can take inputs, put it into this artificial brain, and it's going to produce its own outputs. So that's the difference between training and inference. And so these Tesla vehicles are never going to be used to train new large language models. They're not going to be used to train Grok or anything else, at least not anytime in the near future. But when someone is connecting to something like ChatGPT on the web, that thing that they're connecting to, the compute resources that are used to run that model that they're interacting with, that's the inference compute infrastructure. And that lives in a completely different place. And it's built in a completely different way than the compute that's used to do the training. And so that is something that these Tesla vehicles actually can do. That's what the FSD computer inside of every Tesla is doing when they push out an update and they install a new FSD package of software. It's coming with its own new neural net, and that computer that is in the car is running that neural net based on the inputs that it's receiving, and it's creating its own outputs. And so that computer is made to process neural nets, and you can use that if you can fit. And that's where they say it's kind of an if, but I think it's pretty much a given that over time we're able to get better and better performing neural nets in smaller and smaller packages. One of the reasons that they're so big right now is because we don't really understand how to make them well, and that as time goes on, we make better and better models that use less and less hardware at the same time that we make better and better hardware. And so at some point in the future, Tesla's FSD computer absolutely will be able to run local models of Grok. And as long as the model fits inside that computer, then you could be interacting with Grok, and instead of your requests going from you to some data center in California or Washington or Colorado, it would just be going to your car in your garage, and then you would get it back onto your phone or to your computer or whatever. And so that actually reduces the amount that, if Tesla's not having to have a completely different data center that's doing all that inference computation, that reduces their overhead. They can provide that to you at a much lower price. And potentially, if you have that and you're doing it, maybe the actual running of that model for you is free. And so, but they can also coordinate this entire fleet of vehicles to operate as a service, basically the same way that they do VPP or power. They can have a distributed, coordinated cloud for operating inference of Grok.
Okay. Now tell me all the benefits to Tesla, the development of this Grok AI, conversational AI. So, Elon has been famously pointing out to everybody that Tesla's AI is real world vision based AI. And there's no one close to that. That's using cameras to identify objects or context of what's happening, making decisions based on that. And they're going to use that both for the cars and the robots and multiple other bots that they create. What they're missing is the conversational AI. And it's easier for Tesla to do the conversational AI than it is for, say, chat open AI to then start creating a vision-based AI. So there's this race, who can do the both? Because if you can combine them both, that's where you can get consciousness, general AGI, you can get the most value. So what is the value of Grok in our Teslas and Grok in the bot? Can you come up with some examples? I mean, right now you can do voice commands, but you have to press a button and you have to, and it's not very good yet. You can have conversations with your best friend. Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, so I love the phrase that Elon uses, that he says that all input is error. Well, you can also think about there are different modes of input, and that speaking to things is one of the ways that we interact with the world. We interact with people very easily, and it's a high throughput mechanism to communicate information. It's a lot easier to tell somebody something than it is to text them that same thing. And so that same bit rate throughput limit that we have by using our hand, a mouse, a keyboard, those are all lower information density mediums of interacting with something than voice. And so if we give these vehicles and these robots the ability to interact with us, to hear us and understand us, and then also to speak back to us, that is a much richer communication method that allows us, especially if they understand not only the words that are coming out of our mouth, but the intent behind those words, a very, very, just a much improved method of interacting with that thing. And so it reduces the overall amount of input that's required to get the same action by whether it's your vehicle or whether it's by a Tesla bot or some other form of robotics application.
Yeah,
So
it's just like an
that's
Uber driver, right? You can
yeah,
basically
that's one
say,
thing.
I'm going to go to that building. Why don't you park at the lobby area, then come back to me in 10 minutes? And then you go, they'll do that, right? Or you can
Exactly.
say, tell me more about this. Can you find me a restaurant? I'm really hungry, but and he goes, what do you want? And then you say something and he goes, what do you think about this restaurant? You go, that sounds good. Take me there.
Or even thinking about just in the robotaxi example, you're going along and you know that your preferred, like, don't take a right here at this light, take a left. I know that it's not the shortest way, but it's going to be faster. And you can just say, hey, take a left up here and go this way instead of go that way. Instead of, when you have to do that on a navigation interface,
Yeah.
it's hard. And especially, if you're like, it's one thing to force your Google Maps to reroute you by turning in an opposite direction that it's telling you to turn. But if you're in a robo taxi and you're not in control and you want it to do that, well, how do you do that? And, it's much easier to do that through a voice command than having to get into the map interface and put a pin here and all that. Like, that's the type of simplification and ease that you introduce by having language as your interface mode.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to add there is that, Google has been doing some very interesting research recently using LLMs actually to do training for robotics. And they're
Mhm.
finding that these LLMs, even though they were, designed originally for language, are actually very adaptable to use in the control and manipulation of robotic arms and actuators and all types of things. And so while the interface is definitely the low hanging fruit that it can add to Tesla, there's also a lot that, and this is one of the things that the Tesla team is working with on Optimus, is that they are using neural nets now and improving their usage in the overall control architecture of Optimus. But LLMs and having that tightly integrated within the actual software that operates Optimus can simplify, improve, and add functionality that's much more difficult to add right now. And so, that's one of the other pieces that I'm really excited about to see, and also that applies to the robo taxi as well.
Oh my God. You can almost see how quickly this is going to be the smartest thing ever because it's built on so much information, just unlimited information. The example that James Dalma was telling me almost a year ago was he was saying that anything with a camera can take advantage of Tesla's real world AI. One example would be, how do you know if somebody's drowning in your pool? You put a camera there, but the camera needs to be smart enough to know that it's a human and it's your kid, and they're not just swimming, they're actually drowning. It needs to be
Hmm.
smart enough to do that. And then it needs to be smart enough, well, just all sorts of other things, right? I don't know, is it raining that day? Is there animals around? Whatever. And it needs to know, maybe even tell you how to save your child, how long that they've been in there,
Hmm.
and warn you before if they think that something's dangerous is happening, even just the kid's how by itself, whatever. It needs to learn all this, and it can do this now. So, okay, I want to get to this next part, which is really important for many of us, which is people are wondering who is paying for this XAI. So XAI is a separate corporation that Tesla, Elon created. He, already announced that he had to do that for recruitment purposes. People, the smartest people in the world, didn't want to work for Tesla. They wanted to work for XAI so they can have some more of their shares. But XAI is possibly using Tesla's Dojo. Um, this was something Alexander Mertz pointed out recently and shared this post. And this chart came from Morgan Stanley's research just literally 2 months ago. And they were talking about how Dojo has tremendous potential, not only for Tesla, but for the Mosconomy. So Dojo, supercomputer that Tesla's working on, they're just doubling down on it. It can work for autonomy and robotaxi. It can work for Optimus. It can work for helping battery management. Of course, it can be used for Twitter and X, but it can use for all the other companies, SpaceX, Boring, and also XAI. So what's your thoughts on who's paying for this? People are concerned that Tesla is doing it. Or could this actually be a very first example of Dojo as a service, where XAI, separate company, is paying Tesla for the first example of Dojo as a service? What's your guess on this?
So I think long term there is opportunity for it. It depends on how you define Dojo. Dojo, a lot of people use that kind of as a catch-all umbrella to say Tesla's training compute and whatever their inference compute cloud infrastructure is. Like, it's just Tesla's AI compute clusters and server, data centers. Um, if you actually define Dojo as the Dojo chips that Tesla's producing, well, then that's kind of a different animal, because those Dojo chips are, they were designed before we had this revolution in artificial intelligence. They were not designed in such a way as to really be super flexible and adaptable to do LLM training. They are great at processing video data, and they are definitely something that's being used to train FSD with the video data that they're feeding into these training runs. But I highly doubt that actual Dojo chips are anywhere within the stack of what is being used to either train or run the inference for XAI currently. Now, Elon has openly said that Dojo V2 is going to make the Dojo platform much more general and much more adaptable to other AI use cases. And of course, that is, one of the ways to look at Dojo, and it's one of my favorite ways. And I believe that was James Dalma who shared this with me, is that Dojo is Elon's insurance play for AI compute, the same way that the 4680 is the technology that Elon had to develop for EV batteries in order to ensure that Tesla could grow and accomplish some of the more difficult things that they wanted to accomplish, and also be in control of their destiny as they try to scale and have, their own vertically integrated solution to be able to scale battery production to high levels. So Dojo is kind of the same thing. NVIDIA is keeping pace. NVIDIA in this scenario is the CATL of the AI compute infrastructure, and Dojo is the 4680, and it's taking longer, just like 4680 has taken longer. But all that being said, eventually I do expect to see progress. Currently, XAI, I know this for a fact, XAI is one of NVIDIA's largest customers in 2023. And so I assume that that funding is coming directly from whatever funding that Elon has allocated to XAI. And, I'm not exactly sure how is that venture funded? Is he raising outside capital for that? That's beyond anything that I have insight into currently. But I know that XAI is doing, they're on the cutting edge of research into LLM development. And right now, all of that LLM development is occurring on NVIDIA hardware. And that's going to continue to be the case for at least a few more years. And then we'll see, from there, whether Dojo V2 is really able to be a meaningful contributor inside of Tesla. And then if it's able to, it will first have to contribute to whatever, because Tesla's going to be using LLMs for a variety of different things. We talked about Optimus. It's going to continue to play a larger and larger role in FSD. And so first, Dojo V2 has to take over LLM training from NVIDIA hardware with inside of Tesla. And then if it can do that, well, then potentially it can also be used to serve some of these other needs that Morgan Stanley pointed out. And so I'm sure that's on the roadmap. I'm sure that's exactly where they're wanting to go. That is not where we are today, and that's not where we're going to be for a while.
It's still very, very exciting watching all this development. So now the pieces are in play. You've got a conversational AI that's come out less than 6-8 months ago that he formed XAI. It's now something that we'll see. We're going to play with it in beta to see how comparable it is. But we're here. He's got something real time, and it's able to be a little bit more again, just able to react and be able to make decisions on top of the vision based real time that Tesla is able to do, and tremendous potential not only for the bot but the car and everything else. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.
One more quick point about going back to Grok, and one of the things that is very is going to be a key differentiating factor moving forward with Grok, that they made it a point to say that the goal that they're optimizing for is useful compute per watt. And the overall cost of AI energy usage is the key number one variable. And so the more useful compute you can get per watt that you use, the actual training, all of your cloud infrastructure, like the initial investment to set up either an inference compute cluster or a training compute cluster, all of that collapses to zero in the lifetime of those products compared to the overall energy that's consumed by them. And so they are working very diligently on the software side, both in how they architect training, how they conduct training, how they source data, how they infer models. All of this is one of the reasons why it was so important for them to create a model that was actually much smaller than ChatGPT, that's getting close to ChatGPT performance, is because that will make that a much more competitive product long term. And then if they're able to say, hey, not only is this the cheapest model to run, it's also one of the best performing in terms of time. And if they can give it that reasoning ability as well, which we kind of saw previewed by Grok, even though it's a smaller thing, that reasoning ability is very, very impressive. If they can do all of that, it really wins on every critical dimension of usability from a consumer standpoint, which will make it an extremely competitive product, and would be something that if I was in the position of OpenAI or Bard at Google, or any of these other companies, I'd be very scared that, and it's just one model. There's also a number of other open source models that are trying to attack these same problems. That really, I'm sure that Sam Altman, Satya Nadella, and Sundar Pichai, like these people are very concerned about.
Very good point. Cost efficiency, being able to install in any kind of, anything that a camera they can make smart at this point. It can be giant things or small things. Thank you so much, Hans. Follow him on X and YouTube, Hans C. Nelson. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.